The deafening echo of cannon fire had long faded from Adelaide Fitzgerald's nightmares, but the hollow ache in her chest remained as constant as the Wyoming sunrise. 3 years had passed since she'd received that devastating telegram, informing her that her beloved husband, Thomas Fitzgerald, would never return from the front lines of the Civil War, and yet, every morning, she still reached across the empty expanse of their bed, her fingers grasping at nothing but cold sheets and broken promises. Spring 1868 brought with it a tentative renewal to the small town of Willow Creek, Wyoming Territory. Adelaide stood on the porch of the modest homestead Thomas had built with his own hands before marching off to war in '63. The property sat a mile outside of town, close enough for necessities but far enough to maintain the privacy Thomas had always cherished. The 26-year-old widow surveyed the overgrown fields that had once been their dream 40 acres that Thomas had sworn would someday support them and the large family they'd planned. "I'll come back to you, Addie," he'd promised the night before he left. "And when I do, we'll finish what we started here. This land will bloom, just you wait." But like so many promises made by men heading off to war, this one remained unfulfilled, buried somewhere in a mass grave at Gettysburg. Adelaide pushed a strand of auburn hair from her face and tightened the apron around her waist. The morning chores wouldn't complete themselves. With practiced movements born from years of solitary routine, she fed the few chickens that remained and milked her single cow. The farm had diminished in Thomas's absence. Maintaining 40 acres was impossible for a lone woman, regardless of her determination. By mid-morning, Adelaide had hitched her mare to the wagon and was heading into town for supplies. The weekly journey was her only regular contact with others, a necessity rather than a social call. The townsfolk were kind enough, offering sympathetic smiles that had long since lost their sincerity. A widow's grief was expected to fade with time, and Adelaide had learned to hide hers behind a mask of stoic independence. The general store buzzed with the usual Saturday activity. Adelaide nodded politely to Mrs. Patterson, whose husband had returned from the war missing an arm, but alive nonetheless. The pang of envy that shot through Adelaide's heart was familiar, now almost a comfort in its reliability. "Adelaide," called Mr. Wilson from behind the counter. "Got your flour and sugar all ready. Heard you might be needing some seeds too?" Adelaide approached the counter, list in hand. "Yes, Mr. Wilson. If I'm to plant anything this season, I'll need to start soon." The storekeeper's expression softened. "You know, Mrs. Fitzgerald, it's mighty ambitious for you to manage that land all by yourself." "Perhaps I manage just fine," Adelaide interrupted, her voice firm but polite. "Thomas wanted that land worked, and worked it shall be." She didn't add that it was all she had left of him, his dream, preserved in soil and sweat. Mr. Wilson nodded, knowing better than to argue. "Well then, I've got some fine bean seeds just arrived. Good yield, hearty too." The bell above the door jingled, and the store fell momentarily silent. Adelaide turned to see a stranger entering, a tall man with broad shoulders and a sun-weathered face. His dark blonde hair was longer than fashion dictated, and a well-groomed beard framed a strong jawline. He wasn't dressed like the local ranchers or farmers. His clothing spoke of long days in the saddle across open country. "Afternoon," he greeted, removing his hat to reveal surprisingly gentle blue eyes that contrasted with his rugged appearance. "Cole Vance," Mr. Wilson exclaimed, extending his hand. "Didn't expect to see you back in these parts." The stranger Cole smiled, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Didn't expect to be back, if I'm honest. Trail drive finished early, and I found myself pointed this direction." Adelaide turned back to her list, trying to appear uninterested, though something about the man's voice, deep and melodious with a slight southern drawl, had captured her attention. "Mrs. Fitzgerald here is buying seeds," Mr. Wilson said, inclining his head toward Adelaide. "Perhaps you could offer some advice, being as you worked that Johnson place years back." Adelaide stiffened, disliking being discussed as though she weren't present. "I'm quite capable of selecting my own seeds, thank you." Cole Vance looked at her then, really looked at her, and Adelaide felt an unfamiliar warmth rise to her cheeks. His gaze wasn't invasive or disrespectful. Rather, it was appraising, as one might evaluate a fellow rider's horsemanship. "No doubt you are, madam," he replied, his voice sincere. "But I'd be happy to lend a hand if you need help with the planting." Spring soil can be mighty stubborn in these parts. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Vance, but I've managed on my own these past 3 years. Adelaide collected her purchases, nodding curtly to both men. Good day to you. Outside, Adelaide loaded her supplies into the wagon, irritated by the trembling in her hands. It had been a long time since a man had looked at her as anything other than poor Widow Fitzgerald. She wasn't sure how to feel about it. As she climbed onto the wagon seat, a commotion down the street caught her attention. 3 rough-looking men had cornered a young boy beside the saloon, their postures menacing. "I told you to stay away from my horse, boy," one of the men shouted, pushing the child roughly against the wall. Without thinking, Adelaide jumped down from her wagon and started toward them. Before she could intervene, however, Cole Vance emerged from the general store and crossed the street in long, purposeful strides. "That's enough," Cole's voice carried effortlessly, commanding attention without shouting. The boy meant no harm. The largest of the 3 men turned, his hand hovering near his pistol. "This ain't your concern, stranger. I'm making it my concern." Cole positioned himself between the men and the boy, who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. "Go on home, son," he said over his shoulder, not taking his eyes off the 3 men. The boy scurried away, throwing a grateful look at Cole. "You just cost me the satisfaction of teaching that little thief a lesson," the large man growled. Cole's posture remained relaxed, but Adelaide could sense the readiness in him like a coiled spring. "Boy wasn't stealing. I watched him just admiring your horse. Fine animal, by the way." The tension held for several seconds before the large man spat on the ground. "Ain't worth the trouble. Come on, boys." With that, they sauntered into the saloon. Adelaide found herself still standing in the street when Cole turned and noticed her. "Mrs. Fitzgerald," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Hope I didn't alarm you." "Not at all," she replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "That was a kind thing you did for the boy." Cole shrugged. "Not kind, just right." He glanced at her wagon. "Those look heavy. Mind if I help you load the rest?" Before she could protest, he had gathered the remaining sacks and was placing them carefully in her wagon. Adelaide watched his movements, noting the efficiency with which he worked. There was nothing showy or exaggerated about him. He simply did what needed doing. "Thank you," she said when he finished. "I should be getting back before dark." Cole nodded, stepping back from the wagon. "Safe journey, Mrs. Fitzgerald." As Adelaide drove away, she found herself glancing back at the cowboy still standing in the street, hat in hand, watching her go. It was only when she reached the outskirts of town that she realized she'd been holding her breath. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Spring planting couldn't wait, and Adelaide worked from sunrise to sunset, preparing the soil in the modest section of field she could reasonably manage. Her hands were blistered and her back ached constantly, but there was satisfaction in the work connection to Thomas through the land he'd loved. On Wednesday afternoon, Adelaide was struggling with a particularly stubborn stretch of soil when the sound of hoofbeats approached from the direction of town. Shading her eyes against the sun, she made out Cole Vance riding toward her property, leading a second horse that pulled a small plow. He reined in at the edge of her field. "Afternoon, Mrs. Fitzgerald." Adelaide straightened, brushing dirt from her hands onto her already soiled apron. "Mr. Vance, this is unexpected. Call me Cole, please." He dismounted with fluid grace. "I was speaking with Mr. Wilson about your farm, and he mentioned you were planting alone." He gestured to the plow. "Thought this might help. It's smaller than most, designed for 1 horse, but it'll cut those furrows cleaner than a hand tool." Adelaide's pride warred with practicality. The plow would indeed make her work significantly easier. "That's very generous, Mr. Cole, but I can't accept such charity." "Not charity," he corrected. "Alone. I won't be needing it for a spell, and it's sitting idle otherwise." He unhitched the plow from his second horse. "I can show you how it works, if you'd like." Adelaide hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I would appreciate that." For the next hour, Cole demonstrated the proper technique for using the small plow, explaining how to direct the horse and maintain the correct depth. Adelaide listened attentively, asking questions that evidently impressed him with their insight. "You know farming," he observed as they paused for water. Adelaide took a sip from the dipper. "My father was a farmer in Pennsylvania. I grew up with soil under my nails." She smiled at the memory. Thomas and I met at a harvest dance. He was visiting from New York, said he'd never seen a woman who could outwork most men and still look pretty doing it. It was the first time she'd spoken Thomas's name to a stranger in years, and the ease of it surprised her. Cole didn't press for more information. Instead, he gestured to the plow. Would you like to try it now? Adelaide nodded, grateful for his tact. She took the reins of her mare, now hitched to the plow, and began guiding the animal down the field. The plow cut through the earth with satisfying efficiency, and despite her inexperience, she maintained a relatively straight line. Natural talent, Cole called from where he watched at the edge of the field. By sunset, they had plowed twice the area Adelaide had planned for the day. Cole helped her unhitch the plow and store it in the small barn, working with a quiet competence that required few words. Thank you, Adelaide said as they stood in the fading light. I won't forget this kindness. Cole placed his hat back on his head. No kindness in neighbors helping neighbors, Mrs. Fitzgerald. Adelaide, she corrected, surprising herself. If I'm to call you Cole, then you should use my name as well. He smiled, that dimple appearing briefly. Adelaide, then. Good evening to you. As he rode away, Adelaide realized she hadn't felt this lightness in her chest since before Thomas left. The recognition brought both pleasure and guilt in equal measure. Over the following weeks, Cole became a regular visitor to the Fitzgerald farm. He never arrived empty-handed, always bringing something useful, seeds, tools, or knowledge freely shared. He worked alongside Adelaide without assuming control, respecting her decisions about her land while offering suggestions only when asked. Adelaide learned that Cole had been a ranch hand since he was 16, traveling throughout the Western Territories with cattle drives and occasionally working settled ranches when the opportunity arose. He'd served briefly in the war on the Union side like Thomas, but rarely spoke of it. Not much worth remembering, was all he said when she asked. On a particularly warm afternoon in late May, they sat in the shade of the old oak tree behind Adelaide's house, drinking cool water after planting the last of the bean seeds. Why did you come back to Willow Creek? Adelaide asked. Mr. Wilson seemed surprised to see you that day in the store. Cole leaned back against the tree trunk. Worked a season at the Johnson place about 5 years ago, before the war. Good land, good people. He took a drink of water. After the last cattle drive, I found myself with some money saved and no particular destination. Something pulled me back this way. And now? Will you stay? Adelaide tried to keep her tone casual, though she'd come to value his company more than she cared to admit. Depends, he replied, looking out over the newly planted fields rather than at her. On what? Cole was silent for a long moment. On whether there's reason enough to put down roots. Adelaide felt her heartbeat quicken at the implication in his words, but before she could respond, thunder rumbled in the distance. They both looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Storm's coming, Cole observed, rising to his feet. We'd better get that equipment under cover. They worked quickly, securing tools and making sure the animals were safely in the barn. The first fat raindrops were falling as they dashed toward the house, reaching the porch just as the skies opened. Looks like you might be staying a while, Adelaide said, watching the torrential downpour. Would you like some coffee? Inside, the small house felt even smaller with Cole's presence filling the space. Adelaide busied herself at the stove, acutely aware of him sitting at her kitchen table, the first man to do so since Thomas. The thought brought a familiar twinge of guilt. Your husband built this place? Cole asked, looking around at the simple but solid construction. Adelaide nodded, bringing 2 cups to the table. Thomas was a carpenter by trade. He built every inch of it himself. She sat across from Cole. He had plans to expand it another bedroom, a proper dining room. He said. She swallowed hard. He said we'd need the room for all the children we'd have. Cole's expression remained gentle. He sounds like a good man. The best, Adelaide agreed, then found herself continuing. We'd been married less than a year when the war started. He didn't enlist right away, we were just establishing the farm. But by 63, he couldn't stand watching other men fight while he remained safe at home. She stared into her coffee. He promised he'd come back and finish what we started here. But he never did. Cole was quiet for a moment. Some promises are beyond a man's power to keep. I know that, Adelaide whispered. But it doesn't make the broken promise hurt any less. The rain continued to pound on the roof, creating a cocoon of sound around them. Adelaide felt exposed, having revealed more of her grief than she had to anyone since Thomas's death. "I met your husband," Cole said suddenly. Adelaide's head snapped up. "What?" Cole's blue eyes held her steadily. "In Virginia, late '63. We were in different units, but ended up in the same field hospital after Bristow Station. Nothing serious. I took some shrapnel in the shoulder. He had a bullet graze his leg." Adelaide's hands trembled around her cup. "You knew Thomas?" "For 3 days," Cole clarified. "Cots were side by side. He talked about you constantly, showed me a tintype he carried. Said he had the most beautiful wife in Wyoming territory waiting for him, and 40 acres that were going to be the finest farm in the county." Tears welled in Adelaide's eyes. "He never mentioned you in his letters." "No reason he should have. Just 2 soldiers passing time, trying not to think about the fighting ahead." Cole's voice grew softer. "But I never forgot him, or the way he spoke about you. Man that devoted to his wife and his land, it leaves an impression." Adelaide wiped at her tears. "When did you realize I was his widow?" "Not until I saw the farm that first day," Cole admitted. "The name Fitzgerald rang familiar in town, but I couldn't place it. Then I saw this house, recognized it from his description. Too many details matched to be coincidence." "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Cole's eyes held a depth of understanding that took her breath away. "Some things need their own time, Adelaide." The rain began to ease, and with it, some of the tension in the room dissipated. They sat in comfortable silence until the storm passed completely. As Cole prepared to leave, Adelaide followed him onto the porch. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked, no longer bothering to hide the hope in her voice. Cole settled his hat on his head. "If you'd like me to, I would." His smile was brief but genuine. "Then I'll be here." True to his word, Cole returned the next day and the next. June brought warmer weather and the first tender shoots in Adelaide's fields. With Cole's help, she managed to plant more acreage than she had in the previous 2 years combined. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and often sharing simple meals in the evening. Cole never presumed or pushed for more, and Adelaide found herself increasingly drawn to his steady presence and quiet strength. One evening in late June, as they sat on her porch watching fireflies dance over the fields, Adelaide finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "What made you help me that first day, Cole?" "With the plow." He considered her question carefully. Seemed like the right thing to do. There must have been more to it than that. Cole leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When I recognized your farm, realized you were Thomas's wife, I remembered something he said in that field hospital." Adelaide waited, heart beating rapidly. "He made me promise that if he didn't make it back, and I ever passed through Willow Creek, I'd check on his wife." Cole's voice was low. "Said he knew it was a strange request to make of a stranger, but he had a feeling about me." Adelaide's breath caught. "You came here because of a promise made to a dying man?" "He wasn't dying then," Cole corrected gently. "Just afraid he might not make it home. And I didn't come to Willow Creek because of that promise. That was chance. But once I knew who you were." He shrugged. "A promise is a promise." Adelaide sat with this revelation, trying to process the strange twist of fate that had brought Cole to her door. So all of this, the help with the farm, was fulfilling an obligation to Thomas? Cole turned to look at her then, his eyes serious in the fading light. "It started that way," he admitted. "But it hasn't been about Thomas for some time now, Adelaide." The honesty in his gaze made her heart flutter. "What has it been about, then?" "You." The word hung in the air between them. "Your strength. Your determination. The way you face each day with courage, even when it would be easier to give up." Adelaide felt tears stinging her eyes. "I've just been surviving, Cole." "No," he said firmly. "You've been honoring Thomas's dream, keeping his memory alive through this land. That's more than surviving." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "But there comes a time when honoring the past and building a future become 2 different paths." Adelaide looked down at their joined hands. "I feel guilty," she whispered, "for wanting more than memories." "Thomas wanted you to be happy," Cole said. "That much was clear in every word he spoke about you." They sat in silence as darkness fell completely, hands still linked, each lost in their own thoughts. July brought sweltering heat and the first tensions between them. Adelaide found herself increasingly aware of Cole as a man, his strength, his gentleness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. But with that awareness came guilt and fear. One particularly hot afternoon, as they worked to repair a section of fence, their hands brushed accidentally. The simple contact sent a jolt through Adelaide that she couldn't ignore. "I think you should go," she said abruptly, stepping back. Cole straightened, confusion evident in his expression. "Have I done something wrong?" "No," Adelaide shook her head. "That's the problem. You've done everything right. You've been kind and helpful and—" She struggled to find the words. "But this isn't what Thomas would want." "What do you think Thomas would want for you, Adelaide?" Cole asked quietly. "He would want me to be faithful to his memory," she replied, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. Cole set down his tools carefully. "Is that truly what faithfulness means to you? Living alone with ghosts?" His question struck at the heart of her conflict. "I don't know anymore," she admitted. "I only know that when I'm with you, I feel alive again. And that terrifies me." Cole's expression softened. "Fear is natural. So is living." "I need time," Adelaide said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Please understand." "I understand," Cole replied, his voice gentle. "I'll give you all the time you need." He left without another word, and for the first time in weeks, Adelaide faced the evening alone. The house felt emptier than before, the silence more profound. She moved through her chores mechanically, trying not to think about Cole or the hurt she'd seen in his eyes. That night, unable to sleep, Adelaide pulled out the small wooden chest where she kept Thomas's letters. Reading them had been a ritual during the first year of her widowhood, but she'd gradually stopped, the pain too sharp to bear regularly. Now, she opened the first letter with trembling hands. Thomas's handwriting flowed across the page, filled with love and hope and dreams for their future. He wrote of the farm they would build, the family they would have, the life that stretched before them. In each letter, his love for her was palpable, a living thing preserved in ink and paper. The final letter, written just days before his death, contained a passage she'd read so many times she knew it by heart. "If fate should decree that I never return to you, my dearest Adelaide, know that my greatest wish is for your happiness. The thought of you alone forever would grieve me more than death itself. You were made for joy, for love, for life in all its fullness. Promise me, my love, that you will not let my memory become a chain that binds you to solitude." Adelaide pressed the letter to her chest, tears flowing freely. All this time, she had been faithfully tending Thomas's land but ignoring his final request that she live fully in his absence. The next morning, Adelaide hitched her mare to the wagon and drove into town with purpose. She found Cole at the livery stable, where he had taken work shortly after arriving in Willow Creek. He looked up from the horse he was shoeing, surprise evident on his face. "Adelaide, I need to speak with you," she said, heart pounding. "Privately." Cole nodded to the stable owner and led Adelaide outside, to a quiet spot behind the building. "What is it?" Adelaide took a deep breath. "I reread Thomas's letters last night. All of them." She met Cole's gaze squarely. "In his last letter, he asked me not to chain myself to solitude out of loyalty to his memory. He wanted me to find happiness again." Cole remained silent, watching her with those perceptive blue eyes. "I've been so afraid," Adelaide continued. "Afraid that moving forward meant forgetting him, betraying what we had." She stepped closer to Cole. "But I realize now that the greatest betrayal would be ignoring his final wish for me to live fully." "And what does living fully mean to you, Adelaide?" Cole asked, his voice low. "It means acknowledging what I feel for you," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "It means being brave enough to open my heart again, even knowing the risk." Cole reached out slowly, cupping her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "I didn't come to Willow Creek looking for love," he said, "but I found it all the same. In you, Adelaide. In your courage and your heart." "Thomas made you promise to check on me," Adelaide whispered. "But he never asked you to fall in love with his widow." Cole's smile was tender. "No, he didn't. That part happened all on its own." His thumb brushed her cheek. "When I told you I'd keep his promise, I meant checking on you. But now I understand there was a deeper promise Thomas wanted, kept the promise that you would be loved and cared for, that you would have the full life he dreamed for you." "Then I'll keep his promise for him," Cole said softly, echoing words he'd spoken months ago in a different context. Adelaide closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. I'm still afraid, she admitted. I know, Cole replied. So am I. Love is always a risk, Adelaide. But some risks are worth taking. When his lips met hers, Adelaide felt something inside her shift, not replacing the love she'd had for Thomas, but creating space beside it, a new chamber in her heart opening to possibility. The summer passed in a blur of hard work and newfound joy. The farm flourished under their combined efforts, and Adelaide found herself looking forward rather than back for the first time in years. Cole continued to work at the livery stable in town, saving his earnings while helping Adelaide bring in the harvest from her expanded fields. By September, their relationship was the talk of Willow Creek, but the gossip was largely good-natured. The townsfolk had watched Adelaide struggle alone for too long to begrudge her this happiness. On a golden afternoon in early October, as they walked through the harvested fields, Cole stopped beneath the old oak tree where they'd shared so many conversations. This land, he said, looking out over the 40 acres, it's good land. Thomas had the right of it. Adelaide nodded. Yes, he did. I've been thinking, Cole continued, turning to face her, about promises and futures. Adelaide felt her heart quicken at the seriousness in his tone. I love you, Adelaide Fitzgerald. I love your strength, your heart, your determination. I love the way you honor the past while embracing the present. He took her hands in his. I don't want to replace Thomas in your heart. That would be impossible and wrong. But I'm hoping there's room in your life for a new love, a new beginning. From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold band. This was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to the woman who made me want to stop wandering. His blue eyes held her steadily. I found her. Adelaide felt tears spilling down her cheeks. Cole, will you marry me, Adelaide? Will you let me help you build the life Thomas dreamed for you for this land? Not to replace his memory, but to honor it by living fully as he wanted for you. Adelaide looked at the ring, then at the man before her, this good, patient man who had walked into her life when she least expected it and showed her that grief and joy could coexist, that loving again didn't diminish what came before. Yes, she whispered, then more firmly. Yes, I will marry you, Cole Vance. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Adelaide felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Thomas would always be part of her story, part of this land. But Cole was her future, a future she was finally ready to embrace. They were married in November, a small ceremony in the town church with the community that had supported Adelaide through her darkest days, now celebrating her brightest. Cole moved into the farmhouse, bringing with him the few possessions he'd accumulated in his years of wandering. Together, they expanded the house that winter, adding the bedroom and dining room that Thomas had planned. Adelaide found peace in the symmetry of it, Cole helping to fulfill Thomas's vision for the property, not erasing his contributions, but building upon them. By spring of 1869, the farm was transformed. New fencing enclosed expanded fields, and Cole had added a proper stable for the additional horses he'd acquired. They worked as partners, each bringing different strengths to the enterprise. On a warm evening in April, almost exactly a year after Cole had first appeared in the general store, they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the fields gold. I have something to tell you, Adelaide said, taking Cole's hand and placing it gently on her stomach. His eyes widened in understanding. You're sure? Adelaide nodded, her smile radiant. The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We'll have a child by winter. Cole pulled her into his arms, his joy palpable. Thomas would be proud, he whispered against her hair. Of both of us, Adelaide agreed, no longer feeling guilt at the mention of her first husband. In her heart, she knew that somehow, Thomas had guided Cole to her, not to replace him, but to continue what he couldn't finish. That December, Adelaide gave birth to a healthy son they named James Thomas Vance, honoring both Cole's father and Adelaide's first love. As she watched Cole cradle their child, Adelaide felt the fullness of life that Thomas had wished for her, not a life without grief or memory, but one rich with love both past and present. By the time James turned 5, he had been joined by a sister, Sarah. The Vance farm was known throughout the county for its productivity and hospitality. Cole and Adelaide had transformed the once struggling homestead into a thriving enterprise that employed several townspeople during harvest seasons. On James's 5th birthday, Adelaide took him to the small marker she had placed at the far edge of the property in Thomas's memory. It was a private spot, peaceful beneath a stand of aspens. Who was he? James asked, looking at the simple stone bearing Thomas's name. He was a brave man who loved this land, Adelaide replied, her voice steady. He dreamed of what it could become and started building it before he had to go away. And then Papa came to help finish it? James asked with a child's intuitive understanding. Adelaide smiled, brushing back her son's dark blonde hair, so like Cole's. Yes, exactly that. Two good men who loved the same things, this farm, this life. She kissed the top of his head. And me? Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Adelaide found Cole on the porch, looking out at the moonlit fields. She settled beside him, leaning into his familiar embrace. I took James to Thomas's marker today, she said quietly. Cole nodded, his arm tightening around her shoulders. It's right that he should know. I was thinking about promises, Adelaide continued. The ones kept and the ones that find new ways of fulfillment. Cole was silent for a moment. Some might say it was chance that brought me here, but I don't believe that anymore. Nor do I, Adelaide agreed. They sat together in comfortable silence, surrounded by the night sounds of the farm they had built together, the soft nickering of horses in the stable, the rustle of wind through the crops, the distant howl of a coyote on the hills. Two loves, Adelaide reflected, neither diminishing the other. Thomas's promise to return had been beyond his power to keep, but through Cole, the spirit of that promise, the dream of a thriving farm and a happy home, had been fulfilled in ways neither of them could have imagined that day they parted in 1863. And in that fulfillment, there was not just peace, but joy, the fullest expression of life that Thomas had wished for her, and that she had found again in the arms of a cowboy who had kept a promise not his own.